Welcome, everybody. My name is Jill Stott, and I'm a Senior Agile Trainer at NextUp Solutions. Just a tiny bit about me. So I've been in the IT world since I was born and done a lot of different jobs. About 5 or 6 years ago, I became an Agile coach. And then I really liked the training aspect of it. So I took this job at NextUp Solutions, which is a fantastic company. And I get to do fun webinars like this. Danny is my co-host. Danny, would you please introduce yourself?
That's right. Thank you, Jill. So my name is Danny Janot. I'm the training client and operations specialist at NextUp Solutions. So any of our public or private trainings, I would be the one working with you to get you set up for class and ultimately certified in whatever respective class you're attending. So I'll be your person to help you out, and happy to co-host here with Jill. As we go through today, I mentioned beforehand, so our webinars are meant to be interactive, more of a conversation. So as we go through, feel free to take yourself off mute at any point and ask a question if you have one, or if you'd like to have your chat window open, I'll be monitoring the chat. So if you want to address any questions in there, I'll be keeping an eye out there. So, but we're happy to have you all with us. And Jill, how do you master user stories?
Thanks, Danny. Let's begin. First, I'm going to share my screen. And just a quick little tidbit about a little bit more about NextUp Solutions. My awesome colleague made these just so you understand what we offer. And Hunter's really excited. She's our marketing person. So we provide a lot of different trainings in the Agile space. We've been doing it for years. Like, I don't mean to brag, but we're really good at it. We've done it for many, many years. We have that 10,000 hours, if you will. We're in the expert level. And we also have, I guess, our sibling, we call that our sibling company, Acceleration. They're based in Blacksburg, and they hire undergraduate software developers to create awesome products that people request at a really low price, super high quality. We have these very senior mentors that help them take that to fruition.
Yeah, it's one of the top internship programs in the entire world, actually, ranked in, I believe, and Hunter, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe number 3 tech internship program in the entire world.
That's correct.
In the world? Whoa.
In the world, yeah.
They should get medals. So just real quickly, some of the trainings that we offer the collection from the Scrum Alliance. Our CSM and CSPO are probably our most popular classes, but we've been adding some of the more advanced classes. If you're a Scrum Master or a product owner, it would be very beneficial to take some of these. We have some additional leadership classes coming and some technical classes. I specifically teach our Kanban university courses that have been becoming really popular, and I'm excited to do those. I also teach our Scaled Agile private classes, and we've recently added our DevOps Institute, DevOps Foundation, and DevSecOps that we'll be offering to the public shortly. And then we also have our IC Agile facilitation and testing options.
Mm-hmm.
And we do offer coaching as well. So if you say, oh, this training is fantastic, now I need someone with a ton of experience to come in and really mentor us, sit with us, observe what we're doing, and give us advice and help us really leverage all these Agile tools that we've been taught about. It's easier said than done, because like I always say, Agile's easy, people are hard. So it does take a while in that journey to really truly transform and see the value of it. And then I have to say, Danny introduced himself. So one of the cool things about this company, we have these 3 awesome people who really have this a knack for customer service. And if you have a question, you can call and talk to a live person and ask questions and get more information. And they will follow you every step of the way through your training journey, from the sign up, the class itself, and then, like Danny mentioned, the certification and the closing out of it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So now we're ready. Why user stories? So first of all, let's go ahead and take a little poll just to see where everybody's at as far as your experience. So I'm going to launch a Zoom poll. You should see something pop up on your screen. It's very basic. It's all anonymous. Just rate your experience and your knowledge about user stories.
All right. It's like one of those carnival games where you spray the thing to see. So we've got number 3, average in the lead at 65%.
Oh, the little horsies.
Yeah, so we've got 17 out of 21 reporting. So yeah, it looks like average is going to win. So everybody has about an average knowledge and experience of user stories.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the polling, and then you can see the results. Okay, so we've got some that are new to user stories. We have an expert here, maybe they're a product owner, and then like Jenny said, most of them are average. So some of this will be reviewed for our experts. Some of it might be new. So those of you who haven't used user stories, aren't familiar with it, this isn't like 101 user stories, but we will talk about some of the basics. But please don't hesitate to ask questions if there's something that's confusing or you want to clarify information about it. All right. So first of all, let's talk about why we moved to user stories, and then we'll talk about what they are and how to write them. So initially, back in the day, I was a business analyst, and this is basically the conversation we would have. Hey, I have this great idea for a new feature to add to our product, and then this person would, okay, cool, let's do it. And then this was me. I didn't wear dresses though. I'm going to start writing the detailed requirements. So I would get in my own little hutch by myself and just write every little thing. Literally, the longer the better, the more detailed the better, dictating every possible scenario I could imagine. And then this guy, yay, Jill's going to write this 50-page document, throw it over the fence, and we never have to talk to each other again. What are the problems, Danny, do you think, with doing it that way?
I'm sorry, Jill, I have to admit that I was distracted by my son's squealing in the other room, so I missed the last part.
Welcome to working from home. Totally understood. So I'll tell you, in my experience, the problem with that is you can't document everything. And it would take me 3 months at minimum to get all this stuff done. It costs money, right? They're paying me to do all this stuff. And as soon as I handed it to the developers, and we had to get them signed in blood to make sure they'd never changed, they would say, oh, this isn't going to work. We didn't have a process to quickly adapt and modify it. And so it was a huge delay, and it cost a lot of money. And then since we weren't talking very often and we weren't even interacting with our customers, we get to the end of our 2-year iteration, and surprise, the customers don't even want that huge feature that we just added and cost us $1 million. Not a very effective way to develop software or anything that's creative, knowing that the market changes all the time and what people want, they don't always know what they want. So in the 90s, let's see, I think it came from, Extreme Programming. It's an agile framework, came up with the concept of, hey, rather than having all this documentation up front, why don't we narrow it down to what they called user stories? And the intention is, hey, we'll have this small token, but the idea is we'll have a conversation. You really can't ask a document questions and get feedback. A lot of misassumptions occur if it's all just relying on documentation. So here we have this conversation. Hey, here's what the customer's expecting. Here's the problem that we're trying to solve. Maybe we even have the customer themselves come in and explain the issue or the opportunity that they want to take advantage of with a new feature or a new piece of functionality. And then the idea is this team, whoever's building it, whoever is representing the customer, is continuing having conversations while it's being built, rather than just one and done. And that just continues on. So it's a different way of working, really, not just a different way of documenting your requirements. Oops. Okay, so traditional requirements focuses on the functionality, what the solution should do. And I work with a lot of product owners and business analysts who still kind of have that mindset as they're writing user stories. So an example, let's suppose of that would be 1.1.1, the web camera must respond to speaker movement and swivel to fit their face and body in the frame. The microphone must adjust to capture audio within 6 feet of the speaker's originally designated location. This is kind of describing how the tool that you're developing should function. What are some limitations to that, Danny, if you don't mind sharing your thoughts, your guesses? Or any
Well,
not?
yeah, well, so it has some specifics that we don't, that are relative, right? So 6 feet from where? So it doesn't really, it would limit us in terms of like how we could build that feature out, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So let's look at another option, user stories. I think I have a little. Stories is the key word here. So human beings love stories. We've been telling each other stories from the beginning of time to explain information, to create a common understanding, to learn about each other and get to know one another and work together collaboratively. There's something that happens in your brain when we start hearing somebody tell a story. We tend to get better attention and we tend to understand it more than just a bullet list of this, 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 and this. And a user story focuses on what the customer wants to achieve, really from their perspective. We don't go into the details of how we're going to implement it. We really want to make sure we build the right thing. That's one of the most expensive things that you do. If you build something you think is going to meet the customer's needs, you get it out to them and they're like, blah, this doesn't work at all. So customer first, that customer focus, and the user story construct really helps you remember to do that. And then there's some different templates you can use to confirm. So how about this story for the same scenario where I want my camera to move automatically. All right. So Danny, did you want to tell the story? Do you want me to?
Well, I tell you, hold on, let's see if my hat. So I'm a famous YouTuber out in Texas. My hat is going to play. It's going to play. You can see it. So here's the thing, Jill. I need you to build me this thing. I'm online social media influencer for my cows, okay, for cow toys. And when I record my YouTubes, I like to walk around and demo the toys with my cows, Jujubee and Davy Dave. Regardless of where I move in my room, I need my followers to clearly see me and hear my voice loud and clear. I need this to happen automatically. This will enable me to focus on my thing and not have to spend my time fiddling with the video and the audio equipment. Can you help me out?
Absolutely. Oh, thank you for sharing, Danny. And I didn't know they made cow toys. You must be like a really innovative.
Well, they say they got happy cows in California. No, my cows are happy cows.
I hear they produce the best milk.
They do. They do.
So just hearing that, even though this is kind of a silly scenario, was that more engaging? What do you guys think? Was that easier to understand? Oh, now I get the why. It's very clear what Danny's trying to do. And then now I can take that and then build on it. Like, okay, what is the best way to fulfill Danny's needs? So we don't want to start conflating the solution with the problem until we have a full understanding of what the situation is. And then we want the producers to come up with, hey, here's how we're going to meet Danny's needs in a really creative, awesome, user-friendly way. Oh, thank you, Danny, by the way, for doing that. He has a whole bunch of hats, if you're wondering, just a whole collection.
I can be anybody at the drop of a hat.
So I love this little statement by Jeff Patton. He has a book on story mapping where stories aren't just a different way to write requirements. And this is really important. When I went from oh, sorry, what was that, Danny?
So you're not sharing your screen anymore.
I think that would be helpful. I like to turn it off when we're just talking. It makes for a better video too, or recording. All right, so down here at the bottom here, stories aren't a different way to write requirements. The thought is when I was a BA and I used to do those 50-page documents, and then we had a 1-second training on Scrum. It's like, okay, now you have to write them as user stories. It was paralyzing because I thought this is just a new way to do requirements and didn't understand that user stories aren't just that little written statement. It really requires you to work differently. That collaborative conversation is key. The user story itself is nice and it helps focus you, but if you aren't talking to each other daily, the people who are producing whatever it is you value, and then the business side, there's a really big chance you're going to build the wrong thing or the thing wrong.
Hi, Jill. Quick one. This is Femi here. So it's Jeff and you saying that user stories are not a form of requirement.
a different form of requirement. How's that? A different way to write requirements. So they are, so it's not just the written stuff that's the requirement, it's also that conversation. And then we'll talk about, I mean, that's a great question, acceptance criteria too, which kind of flushes those details out. Hey, here's, it has to have this and this and this.
Excellent, thanks.
Great question, thank you. Any other questions before we move on to different formats you can use for user stories? Okay. So just to reiterate that, there's still a temptation, and even I have this, where, you know, I think I just want someone to hand me, here's what you want to build, and then let me go into my little silo and write it. I feel like I can get more stuff done, which you probably could, but that stuff might be wrong. And so it takes a while for teams, if they're not used to working collaboratively, it takes a while to get to that point. Just be cognizant of that. Some people particularly in IT, aren't a big fan of having a lot of chit chats with each other. They might feel like it's a waste of time, or they're more introverted. They might need some breaks. So just be aware of that. Communication doesn't just come from talking on the phone or over the Zoom or getting into a meeting. It also includes, you know, chats over electronic tools with your Slack and emails and things like that. That also is a great tool to ask a quick question for your product owner. Oh, cool. Okay, thank you. Not a lot of time wasted. Okay, first of all, user story formats. You've probably, for those of you who are semi-familiar with user stories, probably know the one most popular format, but they're guides. So they were never intended to be the rule. So if you don't write them perfectly, I was so paranoid when I first started, like, it's got to be perfect, or that agile coach we hired is going to come yell at me and say, no, actually that needs to have a that in it, it's wrong. So I'd spend more time worrying about how to craft it than what the message really was and the conversation I should be having with our customer and with our team. So watch this. Wow, is that cool?
Ooh, thank you.
Don't stress over the format. Okay, that's number one. Don't stress over the format. But here's what we're trying to capture in the written statement that you'll create. We want to make sure, and the conversation, that we have a clear understanding of who is this for. What is the customer like? Like in Danny's story, I realized, oh, has a rancher, and it kind of gives me an idea of how I'm going to develop this solution, understanding what his viewpoints are and having those different personas. And then we want to know, just clear statement, hey, what is it that you want, right? He wants a camera that moves around with him. And why? Because Danny wants to make sure, he doesn't have time. He's got all those cows and maybe some pigs and sheep. He doesn't have time to like stop, move the camera. And then you have to splice it all together. I've tried to do that. It's a pain. He wants to do his thing. And then, yes?
You got me.
You betcha. And then we're going to talk about acceptance criteria. What makes this chunk of work? What are some things that have to be in there in order for it to meet our customers' needs? Now, the most popular is what's called the Connextra format. So who's familiar with the Connextra format? So, oh, I see Katie raised her hand. Awesome. So as a blank, I want to do blank, so blank. So this is great. It's concise, it's simple, it's familiar. Maybe one of the disadvantages, it tends to lock you into one point of view. You might not flesh out some of the other details. So this is just a tool to help you have the conversation. So I want to understand my user. I want to understand the requirement or what the output should be. And then this is probably the most important statement here at the bottom is your value statement, the why. So that, and I've seen a lot of user stories who they do not add that last statement. That's problematic because you don't know why you're building it. Maybe it's just because your VP said to. You might be building something that people don't want, and you could have spent that valuable time building something that people want and will add value. So it's called the Connextra format, by the way. It was developed by Rachel Davies at an English company called Connextra in the early 2000s. And, you know, and since then it's become kind of the recognized standard. So here's an example here of what that might look like. As a 20-year-old music enthusiast, I want my friends to see what songs I'm listening to in real time so that we can keep our music choices aligned. So it's very concise. It tells me the why. It helps me kind of get in the customer's head. It's so important to build empathy with your customers and kind of say, okay, what would it be like to be this person who's 20, which is way past my prime? Then I will develop the solution that will fit that person's needs better than I just make assumptions. Well, that's just what I would do. I would just have them call on the phone the old-fashioned way and say, why am I doing a Texas accent now, Debbie? Here's what I would do. I'm listening to the Beatles now. So that's a really simple way to do that. Any questions on our Connextra format? All right, but surprise.
I actually have
Yes,
a
go ahead,
question.
Danny.
So, I mean, so this is the most popular formula. Is it fail safe? Like if I just plug in the things into that formula, will I always get a good user story? Like
You'll get a token. So remember, this is the token. And then if you're thinking about user stories holistically, this is just one piece of it. It's like your little notation. And then it's all that collaboration and conversation. And then as you build that thing, that feature, that request, that basically becomes, hey, this is the output of our, and it kind of becomes the specification, the actual code if you're doing IT. So nothing's fail safe. These are guidelines. So don't trick yourself out. Hey, I wrote the user story right. Why in the heck did I not get the right thing?
Blank and ding and dang, so it's going to be great, right?
Right. So at the end, Danny gets this tiny little cat toy because we misheard. And the cows are like, no. What about a cow? Probably a football. Okay.
Is the acceptance criteria basically added on to this, or is it separate, or okay?
Absolutely. So what I like to do is just, and we'll talk about this more in a few minutes, but just have your user story, clarify those, and then you can just have a bullet point as a simple way to do it. Must have this, 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 this. Those are the non-negotiables. Thanks. Great question, Hidil. Oh, I love this from Amy in the chat. How the Scrum team tends to write, her Scrum team tries to write things like this. As a developer, I want. So that's not a user story, right? The developer isn't using the product. Now, FYI, I don't have a slide for this, but if you have technical debt stories that the developers, the testers want to add, and it's stuff that needs to happen, like refactoring, writing automated test cases and so forth. Don't worry about putting it in this format. It's just confusing and troubling. Just write down, here's what we need to do, and then make sure it's tracked in your backlog with the other work. All right, here's another thing that you can, it could potentially be standalone. It's called currently instead, or you could tack that on to your user story, to other clauses. And the thought is, okay, I want to get a little more information on what the current situation is. It might be our current product, or it might be some other problem or opportunity. And this is how my customer is handling it right now. And then what is their desired change? What is their vision? Where do they see this thing going? So the best way is just to show you an example. So here you would just write currently. Sometimes they write whereas currently, but that seems really pretentious. This is like pretend it's Walmart. So currently we ask our customers to log in and give us feedback on their experience after they leave the store. We have less than 1% response rate. And instead, we want the customers to give us feedback before they leave the store so we can increase our response rate. Elaborating that story and giving us a bigger, fuller picture of the vision that they have in their heads, where they would like to go.
We've got a couple of questions here, Jill.
Oh, fantastic.
So Shannon asked, when you are delivering work that doesn't bring direct impact to the UI, is it acceptable to begin with as a system? Question mark.
You could. UI. You could, but I think it's just confusing. If it's a technical, they call them spikes or enablers, it's something like that. Just make it clear. What I always do is in the title, I would put spike sometimes, I don't know why they call them spike, and then here's the description, and then or the name of that, and then a full description. Then it's very clear that this is not directly going into my customer's hands, but it's going to indirectly assist the support of the stuff that we're developing for our customers.
Great. And then Hadil says, could it be comparing a competitor's product as the currently? Question mark.
Yes. Oh, that's fantastic. Yes, absolutely. Currently, we have this problem here, and this is what we would like, because maybe you already went to your competitor and they're like, nah. So that's a huge opportunity to see that. That's a great question. Okay. Any other questions on currently ... instead? You don't have to use those words. If something, problem statement here, possible vision, that's fine, whatever makes sense, but keep it consistent so people can quickly look at it and say, oh, I get the pattern. All right, here's another format. It's not that different from Connextra, but it's from Chris Matz. I can't remember what company he works with, but it's just kind of flipping it on its head. So like I mentioned, a lot of people will leave off the value statement, the so bad. And in this one, we put it at the beginning. So it just kind of emphasizes that the why is the most important piece of this user story. So example, in order to collaborate better with my team virtually. So I instantly know what they want to do, basically why they want to do it. As a manager, I want the ability for the team to contribute on an online whiteboard or something like that. So just a tiny tweak. You might want to just experiment with these and see if it makes any difference as far as understanding on the team's perspective, plus your understanding on what the customer really is looking for. And sometimes they don't even know what they're looking for, but that's why we will have those iterations and clarify it. All right, that's pretty straightforward. Next we have, this is the last one, our 5 W's format. So this might look familiar. We're answering who, why, and what, just like we do with the Connextra format. Just in a little bit different shape. Some people are really familiar with those 5 W's, and it also answers, if it makes sense, the when and where. So let's see. This is I got this from a sitcom. So who? Okay, who is this person? What's your story? So I don't like to watch baseball, but I want to know about baseball events and outcomes. Well, my colleagues discuss baseball every day, and I want to participate in those conversations so I can be part of the group so they'll like me and they'll invite me to lunch and stuff. Oh, okay. I don't want to start watching those games because they're so boring, Danny.
Oh, come on now. Baseball games. It's all about, you got to know the specific situation, Jill.
And they keep telling me that I'm dumb and wrong, so that's why I want to pretend like I watched them. And so what I'm looking for, I want a summary of the Major League Baseball talking points so that I can have those conversations so they don't figure me out as a fraud. And when do I want it? I want a summary every morning, preferably at 6 a.m. of the previous day's events. And I want them sent directly to me. And then I leave that open because I don't want to dictate how it's going to be sent to me. It could be over email. It could be to social media. There's a whole bunch of different things. And I don't want to tell my developers how to do it because they're the ones who understand the work better than any of us. And they'll come up with something more innovative. Questions on our 5 W's?
Yeah, that's great. That paints a really clear picture. And there actually is an app that does exactly that. but yeah, that's a great.
There is?
Yeah, the MLB app does that. But it's a great example of answering all those, of painting the picture, I think, very well.
Yeah, I like that. Paint me a picture. Make me have a picture in my brain with a story. Okay, and this is just an example. Hey, when you want to quantify expected changes. So this isn't the greatest example, but hey, as a busy bank customer, I want to know the total dollar amount. So quantify it if you can so they're not trying to boil the ocean, right? This is what I want specifically. a little bit better. Hey, I want the ability to request a new card in 2 minutes or less when I throw away my credit card accidentally in the pharmacy bag. I did that twice this year. I found my phone, no damage. So if you can add those concrete details into your user story, that will really help your development team understand what it is they're supposed to build. And then you could also, it helps you understand what the true expectations are. If I didn't have this concrete data, oh, I just want the ability to request a new card online, and oh, I can do it in 2 weeks. Like, that's not what I meant.
Yeah.
Right now, oh yes, go ahead.
Thinking about in terms of the creation of the user stories, just thinking with all these formats, Jill, like how specificity is key, but also like specificity and simplicity. And too broad doesn't get you anywhere. I keep thinking of like Pixar movies and Finding Nemo. You know, if I were to say to you, can you tell me a story about a son that goes missing? Probably everybody on this call, nobody would come up with a story about fish, right? And a journey through the ocean. But if that's really what I want, it's got to be much more specific to help you create the story and then fill in the details, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great example. I love that. Like instead it's like about a cow. That's not what I meant. And also those details can potentially that make more sense in your acceptance criteria, which leads us to acceptance criteria. What a great segue. All right, so here is two different ways I'm going to talk about how to write your acceptance criteria. So let me just step back a hair. So this is the user story that we're going to focus on. And basically, I'm a busy, procrastinating dog owner, and I want a notification from my groomer sent to me automatically when his appointment is due, like 2 weeks ahead. So I won't have to, have that shaved down. Poor Wisby, we always forget, and then literally, this is me. Okay, I admit it. And then we have to shave him almost bald, and then everybody's mad and embarrassed. All right, I see a note from Farron, if I say that right, for Ham. The difference between acceptance criteria and definition of done. Fantastic question, thank you. So here is the difference. They're the same thing, but here's why they're different. So it is, hey, this is kind of what means this user story is done. It meets all these acceptance criteria. Now, if I have things like, okay, every time we have a UI, it needs to return in a millisecond. That would be crazy to put all those things that would apply to all your user stories on every single user story. If you have not like the non-functional requirements, things like that, you're going to have a list this long, and then the important stuff will get missed. So you still want to create that definition of done. So everybody from the business side and on the development side have that clear understanding what done looks like. Otherwise, and I've been in this boat before, you get to the end of your sprint, if you're doing Scrum, you demo it, and then your product owner says, dude, this took 20 minutes to render anything on the screen. And then the developers say, well, it wasn't in the requirements. And then you have a big fight. And then you realize, oh, there's these other requirements we need to specify and put that in a document and make it explicit and reference it often and update it. Okay, so
definition of done is basically an expanded acceptance criteria.
Yes, that applies kind of broadly across the board.
Okay.
For almost all the user stories developed. And we can have a whole webinar on this, I just realized. So you could have section, what does it mean when your user stories are done? What are some stuff that we expect? We want all our automated tests run. We expect new tests created, whatever it is that makes sense. It's really a collaborative effort to build this document. A release, what does a done release look like? What are some different elements that we expect? If we just assume, I promise you, you will miss the mark because you won't be thinking on the same lines.
Yeah, let's see. There are
yes.
Other questions there in the chat here, Jill. And
okay.
I think you might have touched on it, but if you take a look there from CK.
Oh, yes, CK.
Yeah.
CK, so he's asking, what's the difference between acceptance criteria and the definition of ready? Okay, so the definition of ready, and some people say this is an anti-pattern, but blah, what do you want? So if you're having problems where you're pulling work into a sprint and it doesn't have enough information, you haven't had the conversation, you're like, I don't even know where to start. And then it has to go back to the business owner if that's how your flow goes. That is such a huge waste of everybody's time, especially if I'm just going to guess, I'll just start building something and it turns out to be completely wrong because I didn't have enough information. So I worked in a group like this where that kept happening over and over again. And the team was uncomfortable pushing back in those meetings. So we came up with a definition of ready. Before we pull anything into a sprint, hey, that user story needs to have this, 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 and this, and this, and then we need to have the conversation. And so it's just a simple checkbox that is understood between the business side and the development side that really helps avoid those delays and building the wrong things. Oh, okay, then these are great questions, you guys. Oh, thank you, Bruce. That's a great way to say that. DoD is a global effects of all stories. AC is specific to one story, nice and concise. And Farron also asks, can acceptance criteria be changed during the sprint? That's a tricky question. So once we've committed to something and we start working on it, we want to be really careful about not changing the rules during that sprint. Otherwise, there's tons of churn. It's super hard to get things committed. However, on the off chance that something significantly changed, the customer calls up like, oh my gosh, it's got to have this, this, and this. You could change it there in the sprint or potentially tell the customer, okay, you know what, we just started the sprint. We're going to hold off on that and pull something else that's ready and truly understand what the difference is. But you might, the whole goal is to please the customer. But if you're having those acceptance criteria change a lot, that's a problem. It wasn't ready in the first place. So that should be a rare occurrence. Okay, so acceptance criteria. So here's just a common way to do it. And it doesn't matter, but a lot of times if you have a separate business group, they're working with the customer, or maybe you're working directly with the customer and you're basically saying, hey, give me a short, concise list of what has to be there, not dictating the how again. But for this user story here, hey, it must be an optional feature for users. I'm saying that we're not going to force everybody to have this notification if they don't want it. And user notification setup must provide the user a choice of how they want to receive notifications. So it does a little bit get into the how, but if that has to be there, don't tell me after I've developed it and developed it wrong. That's silly. So that's a common way to do acceptance criteria, just a bullet list. A lot of times your business owner will bring a couple in, and then as you have the conversation and the team starts asking questions, then that will probably grow and change. If you've noticed that you have like 20 bullets, there's probably 3 things happening. One, this user story is huge and you need to break it into smaller chunks. And then a lot of times that might align around those acceptance criteria. The other problem might be, hey, you got into the traditional waterfall mindset. You're dictating too many things about how this should be developed. So those are kind of those 2 aspects of it. Yeah. Okay, now I'm going to introduce, we're running a long time, but I think we'll be just fine. The given, when, then. This is another way to write your user stories. And I'm really excited about this. It's been around since I think 2003, but I don't work with a lot of people who use this. So how this works, it's a different construct. To have a discussion with, and the idea is this is built with my business owner, with my development team, which is obviously including my testing team if I have a separate tester. And after we discuss the user story, we say, okay, let's get a little bit more specific. So how this works is, yes, it is supposed to be blank. I'm building the suspense, Amy. So the first term is given. Now, and I'll show you examples of this, so it'll kind of bring it home. So the given statement specifies all the parameters. So what needs to be in place? Like say I'm doing a test case, okay, this is the situation currently. Then I have, this needs to be in this same order, by the way, it's really important. First, define where we're at currently, and then the when statement specifies the action to test. So this is when this happens, essentially, then what do I expect? So the then is basically your expected outcome. Very clean, very concise. So let me give you an example. So same user story. And my given statement could look like this. Given my dog's previous haircut date is known, you can also, if you want to add an additional statement to that to make sure it's clear what's already in place. And the recommended haircut cadence for my dog is defined. Okay, so that's the setup. When my dog is 2 weeks away from his haircut date, then I will get a notification to schedule an appointment. Now, thoughts on it, writing these like this. So some of the advantages, it's very clear and it gets everyone on board. And also, if you're to the point where you're automating test cases, these become the test cases. They just shift right into it. If there's different tools, you still have to write a bunch of backend code, but it connects those together. Now, rather than my tester running off and writing her test cases and then these separate acceptance criteria, we're working through them together. And it might seem like, oh, now we're gonna have to meet with each other longer, but it's actually faster because when I was a tester, I would write all my test cases and then I'd send them, could you please review these to the developers and big long stuff and the product owner and so forth. And either they didn't review them, to be honest, I missed some things, or we had a huge back and forth over the email and it just took forever. So this is an awesome way to really get those concise acceptance criteria that will be converted to test cases. And here's one other one, just to see some examples. Given I haven't chosen whether I want automatic haircut notifications when I log into the application, then I would present with the option of setting those notifications. Now, we could talk all day long about these. It's something you want to consider. I want to just introduce it in this webinar. And then maybe if you think, oh, that could be helpful, do some research, talk to your team and see if they think this would be advantageous, and then experiment. See if it's worth your while. And then let me just show you, the goal is to have these even more specific. So you're giving examples. So you're telling the user story and now we're getting specific. Let me show you what I mean by that. Now it gets real. So given my dog's previous haircut date was on February 6, 2021, and the recommended haircut cadence for my dog is every 6 weeks, when it is March 6, 2021, then I will get a notification to schedule an appointment. So that way, so sometimes we have these generic acceptance criteria and we think we're on the same page, but maybe we're not. As soon as I make it concrete like that, then like, okay, is that what the customer had in mind? Like, yes or no, and make modifications. Then these little data points here, I'm gonna use those to test. Maybe I'll make it parameterized and try different dates to see where I might break the system. What questions do we have on? Oh, I have a question right here from Steve. Who is supposed to write these? So we have a product owner who's not deeply involved. Okay, if we can't get the product owner with us, then it will come. A lot of times we'll have, if we have a separate QA person, they will write those initially if we're not here agile yet, and then hopefully have those reviewed. If we can get the whole dev team to write them, and then we really want the business to say, yes, that's what I had in mind before we actually start working with them. So I've worked with teams the same way where, hey, we're just not, the culture isn't there, or maybe the product owner's on 5 different things where we can't work together and write these. So there's other ways to handle that. What other questions do we have? All right. So now it's just open forum. We've got about 10 minutes left. What questions, thoughts, any experiences you want to share with the rest of us would be fantastic.
I have a question.
Yes, Katie.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Katie.
You mentioned for technical debt stories. Don't waste your time following that format. That's something that we're struggling with currently. And we are doing exactly what you were saying, is like trying to pretend or put ourselves in the shoes of the end user who's actually eventually one day going to benefit from this, and like really getting creative in putting those together in that flow using that Connextra format. So you're saying just skip that altogether?
Skip it all together. Thank you, Kate. I remember we had to do that because our product owner wouldn't let us put any of those spikes in. So we had to like prove that this is adding value. So that's an opportunity. If that's why we're doing those weird constructs, you might want to have a conversation potentially. And that's a whole nother conversation, but helping the business see the value of those and making sure it's not, and honestly, I've seen a lot of developers, myself included, oh, this is someone else's code, we need to rewrite it. And so then if that after your sprint is these tech debt stuff, not cool. So what I like to do is have a negotiation with the business partners. Okay, these things have to happen. I tell a story about the collapsing bridge, and can we at least have 10% or something, some kind of number, so at least we get some of those. Did that answer your question, Katie?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. And then I think Ramia, did you have a question?
Ramia, and then we have
yeah.
a couple in the chat as well.
Yeah, I did have a question. So, like in an agile Scrum environment, would any of these examples of user stories be accepted, or we actually have to stick to one method and just stick with it?
So I'm sorry, I'm not quite understanding the question. So you're saying if it was like a technical story, would it have to be accepted?
No, I'm saying like, so you gave so many examples about how you write user stories. And I was asking, like, in an agile Scrum environment, which one is the most recommended? And if there isn't any, can we just use any of these examples as they sound fit?
So I'm going to give you the answer that everybody hates. It depends. I know. So if you're new to it,
I figured as much.
I know she's going to pull that on me. If you're new to this, I would probably just start with the Connextra since it is common. And then just like everything in Agile, everything's an experiment. Try some of the others and see if that's fleshing out the story better for your customers and your users. That's my recommendation.
So, but there's no rule against, you should stick with one format throughout the whole project. Jill.
Through the whole project, meaning, like the release cycle?
Yeah, so if you're working in Connextra, you're like, we started with Connextra, we got to go Connextra all the way on everything. I
don't like that. I don't think so. Because maybe you do Connextra and this one needs a little more detail. So I'm also going to add those two other clauses that here's how we currently do it. Here's our vision. And each user story can be unique too, depending on the request. And it might need a different treatment. But again, if you're new, start simple, right? Simpler the better. Get your feet wet, help the team to understand why you're doing it this way, and then start to experiment.
And then
thank you very much. That perfectly answered the question.
Oh, you're welcome, Rami.
And Swapna says, who's majorly involved in designing the acceptance criteria? Developer, tester, product owner?
Ideally, all three together.
Hey, Jill, this is Bruce. I had a comment about acceptance criteria. There seems to be a lot of ambiguousness around that. One thing that I recommend when I coach my teams, look to your demo. Acceptance criteria is proving that what you did works, proving that your deliverable is what the customer wanted. Think about your demo. Every Scrum team, Agile team should be doing demos. If you think to that when you're doing your acceptance criteria, the picture kind of becomes really clear.
I love that, Bruce. Thank you. Yeah. Picture the end, like before you start pulling all the details, like imagine we're there with the customer, we're showing it to them. What are the expectations? That's a great way to put it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then let's see here. We have there's a comment from Jim. One format I've seen for TD stories is, quote, when this happens, then this other thing happens, end quote.
Oh, for technical, I haven't seen that before. Thank you, Jim. So just to kind of explain, when this happens, then this thing happens. Okay, I like that. And then
Yep, Lauren says, what if there is no product owner? Is the Scrum Master responsible for all the customer requirements, user stories, acceptance criteria, etc.?
That's interesting. So if you're doing like traditional Scrum, you want to have that dedicated single product owner who is ultimately responsible. It doesn't mean that person has to write them all, but they're the single point. If you're not to that point yet, then I would suggest the team writes them together if that's possible. But then the more people that can collaborate on them, I mean, anyone can write them, but the whole key is the conversation and then having that shared understanding. So it could be the Scrum Master if they have that business knowledge and the customer, they understand the product and they understand the market, they understand what it is the requests are. If not, they could potentially be talking to those people and getting information, but you're going to have some delays in your pipeline if that's the case. But we got to start where we are and then just evolve. That's the agile way.
And then let's see, Hadil says, at what point in the process should acceptance criteria be added to the story? During sprint planning or during when the original story is written?
So I like it during backlog refinement. So if you're running Scrum, if you have a 2-week Scrum, the recommendation is no more than, let's see, 4 hours a week. You'll get together and you're going to look a little bit forward into your backlog and having those conversations, fleshing out the acceptance criteria, potentially sizing if you do that. So then in the sprint planning, it won't take you 13 hours to get all that figured out. And plus then you'll be able to better prioritize as a product owner, knowing that information. Then when I pull it into sprint planning, I'm picking which things I'm going to do. And then the team will kind of have that discussion. Okay, what's our game plan? How are we going to go about tackling this? Good question.
And then follow-up question there is, can the epics follow a similar format to user stories?
I think we're going to say they can. Yes, absolutely. Since an epic might be epic, maybe it will take 3 months to fully flesh out. A lot of people need a little bit more information. You might have to do some case studies, and here's our expected return on investment and things like that to appease the people upstairs. Also, if you're going to have a $1 million epic, you do need to do more due diligence. There's some other formats you can use to help you as a guideline what to come up with.
I have a quick question. I've been finding that my team is using that Connextra format, and it creates really large stories to the point where they exceed the size of the sprint. And I don't know how to get them to refine the story because I don't know at what point is it just, a feature versus a story, like it's so large, but it encapsulates those components for the Connextra. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
I do. So when they're building these, do they have just a gut feeling of, hey, could we do this in a sprint? Do they have any idea? Or do they pull in like, oh, this is huge, we didn't know?
Well, they are story pointing, but it seems like mid-sprint, they realize that it's much bigger. Should they decompose it? Should they break that story into more smaller stories?
Yes. And you'll want to do that ideally before it comes into the sprint. And if they're a new team, this is a hard thing. It takes a while to get there. So I have that user story. And once they're familiar with just kind of, hey, if the story, if they're pointing it to 21, like, dudes, we've never been able to get a 21 done in 2 weeks. We're going to have to slice it into smaller chunks. So, and ideally you'll have what they call vertical chunks, meaning, hey, I want a little piece of the UI, I want some of the back in the database. So I have something of value that at that sprint demo, I can say, hey, owner, is this what you had in mind? And then I can quickly pivot if that's not the case, rather than waiting for 3 months and show them the whole enchilada and realize I was building the wrong thing.
But would you utilize tasks? Do you ever task stuff out?
So if you want to use tasks, that would happen in your sprint planning.
Okay.
And a lot of new teams like that because it's kind of a capacity allocation. Okay, Jill's already booked up 40 hours. We're going to not put any more work on her. Now let's kind of allocate the rest of the work.
Okay.
Some teams just like to, each time they start on a user story, have a discussion and work on it rather than doing it.
Yeah,
All right, thank you so much.
You're
I'd
welcome.
like to make a note on that because that's really important, what you said, and it happens a lot. Your velocity should be telling that story. You should be able to go to your team and say, look, this is twice as big as something that took an entire sprint, or this is 1 day of work and you're trying to fill the whole sprint with it. Your velocity and your metrics are the key to that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, Bruce. And helping them understand why it's important to, as much as you can, meet those commitments. Otherwise, the business like, we never know when they're getting anything done. We don't trust them, and it becomes a problem. But I mean, it does take some time. Reach out if you have any more questions to me, please. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Ramya made a point to break it up. I have heard that a good rule of thumb in a user story using Connextra, for instance, would be to break it up at conjunctions, like keywords. If you see and or but, that's probably a good clue that you can break that up. Is that right, Jill?
Absolutely. That's an easy way to say, okay, we actually have combined 5 different little pieces of the functionality. We can break those into 5 different user stories. There's a whole bunch of data on different ways, because a new team, it's super hard. I've been there, of how you can split those conjunctions. Also, like, okay, what do they say? Create, update, delete. Those could be separate user stories if it's something that fits that model. That's an easy one. Different customers, maybe we have a different slight change. It could also be happy path, and then we want to put in all the other weird scenarios. That could be another way to separate it. Yeah, just type in, and I have documents if you want, but if you go to Google and type that in, how to split user stories, you'll get a wealth of information and tips. Right, looks like we're up to the top of the hour. This has been a great discussion. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. It's great to see a few people we've had in our classes and some new faces. And I think I saw, okay, great. So please reach out, sign up for some classes if you want to learn more about this. We have a lot, our Scrum Master class gets into a lot of detail. The Product Owner class gets even into more detail about user stories. Not just the basics, but what if I have this huge release? Where do I start? How do I get all those user stories mapped out and started? And I hope we see each other again sometime.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you very much. This has been excellent. Look
Great,
forward to
thank
see you guys later.
See you.
Yeah, see you again, Ramya.
I should have given you some time to do your spiel, Danny.
It's good. We covered it in the chat. Hadil had reached out, so I think folks probably saw the information. So that's good.
Oh, perfect. Good.
Stop